Welcome back to Tinygrimes Games, and I'm here with another Star Wars Destiny video. And today I bring you the video that I've been struggling with whether I should make it or not for weeks, and that is a tier list, a deck tier list. For those of you who don't know what that means, in this video I'm going to go through the top decks and sort of let you know where they stand in the competitive rankings. So first question is, why a tier list at all? So a tier list is interesting because some people are going to complain and say we don't need a tier list. It stifles development. It stifles creation. I feel like we're deep enough into the life cycle of the set where most of the top decks have been identified. I don't feel like it's stifling anymore. But I will say this. Any tier list is the opinion of the individual. I'll nuance that a little bit more and say these are not actually my opinions, but what they are is my facts and data that I have assessed and put together. Different people will have different facts and data based on the metas they play with, the quality players they play with who are playing certain decks. If you only see the top players in the world playing Vader Raider, you're going to assume it's the top deck because the top players in your area are playing it. They're playing it well. One other caveat about the tier list is FFG has done an amazing job with this set in designing it balance-wise. And what I mean is, while I have these different tiers, I think anything in tier 2 and above, which is like 25 decks, is all possible to win an event. And it's possible to have somebody who's really good running that deck, winning events consistently. And I'm really impressed by that. It is very hard to take a set of cards and make just such a wide variety of good decks. So I want to give kudos to FFG there. You have done an amazing job here. Now let's go ahead and talk about the decks that I think that my data shows me are the top decks in the meta. All right, so I'm starting with a tier I've called actually tier Django. This is going to annoy some people, but yes, I do think Django is a little bit over the top of the other tier 1 decks. And again, I don't mean that tier Django is unbeatable, it wins every event. No, not at all. Like I said, the design is really good, but tier Django, I think the Django decks are a little bit above. For me, there are 2 decks on this list. Django Trooper, I think, is actually the best deck in the meta. If you were just asking me, like, in a vacuum, what's the best deck in the meta? I think it's Django Trooper. It just has so much damage that it is hard to stop. You put weapons on Django. You put redeploy weapons in there. You have the troopers with 3 non-modified size to go along with Django. Django is, responding and rolling out. It's a tough deck to stop. It puts out a lot of damage. It's a really, really, really good deck. The other deck that I think belongs in tier Django is Django Bala Trooper. This is another really good deck. I think it's neck and neck with Django Double Trooper for best deck. And what differentiates it is that it has more tricks in it, right? It has stuff like fight dirties and maybe an arm to the teeth and some other ways to rely on Bala for extra attacks and stuff. The Django Trooper is more straightforward. I'm going to do so much damage, you're going to have an impossible time handling it. Django Bala Trooper uses tricks. It feels a little bit more fun to me when I play it, like I'm actually doing more. Like, okay, I'm going to plan to get this fight dirty off, and I'm going to try to do this and try to do that. Whereas with Django Trooper, it's more of like, ba-doom, 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 boom, I rolled tons of damage, you're dead. But both, I think, are really, really strong decks. But what's interesting is since both of those decks are in this tier Django tier, they're both range decks, and other range decks are in tier 1. It makes it a little easier to tech for these decks. You put a dodge in there, maybe you put 2 dodges in there, the flex. It's a little bit easier to handle these decks because they are so ubiquitous and so good. Okay, so let's turn to the tier 1 decks. Again, I think the tier 1 decks are all very good decks. Any of these decks are favorites to win any tournament they're in. Whether there's a tier Django deck in there or not, they're still really, really good decks. The obvious one is going to be Elite Django, Elite Veers. And I know some people are going to look at this and go, what are you talking about? This is the best deck in the game. This belongs in the tier Django meta. And I just don't think so. I think this was the first Django deck everyone latched onto. I actually haven't even played it, but I don't fear it either. It just has such a low health pool that I fear much more Django 2 guys than just Django Veers. It could put out a lot of damage, don't get me wrong. But I feel like Django Veers is just a step below. It's still a great deck. It still wins tournaments. It's still going to win tournaments. I just think it's a step below. By the way, if you're wondering where you can find a tier list every week, I do have a tier list on my Patreon page, Patreon Tinygrimes. I update it every week. I publish it for the world every couple of weeks. It doesn't change that much anyway, so don't feel like you have to subscribe if you want the most up-to-date list. It doesn't change that much, but I'm having a lot of fun doing it, and my Patreons are, dropping their ideas of what about this deck, and it has been a lot of fun. Okay, another Tier 1 deck I think is Hyperloop. Hyperloop is not unbeatable. I know some people kind of think it is. It's annoying. It's the most annoying deck for sure. I would not mind if it was errata just simply because it's so annoying. But I don't think it is the best. And I'm even tempted to kind of drop this down a little bit farther. If I made a tier 1.5, which is sort of in between, I would probably put it there. It's a solid deck. It's an aggro deck that can become a control deck. It's a pain to deal with. I think it's a really, really good deck. Another deck in this tier I have is Kylo Dooku. Again, this could be a tier 1.5 list, but it's just really good. I've played a lot of games with this deck now. I think I might have only lost 1 to 2 games out of something like 25. I went 5-0 in one tournament. I'm already 2-0 in the Tabletop Simulator tournament. It's just a flexible deck, and maybe this is just my play style. I do much better with flexible decks. My real great skill is to be able to read a board, read an opponent, and figure out on the fly in a second what strategy do I need to take. Now, when you're playing something like Django Trooper, you don't need to be as flexible. You just roll damage and resolve them. Whereas with Kylo Dooku, you never really know what you're going to get. Are you going to get focus sides? Are you going to get damage sides? What upgrades are going to draw? And it becomes this deck where you really have to be able to know every single matchup, how you need to play it. And I really like a deck like that. And it's, 4 solid melee dice. It synergizes very well. And while Kylo, that is a little bit iffy, the meta kind of favors him right now. Like, he's real good against Hyperloop. He's real good against Poe Ray. He's very good against any blue force power deck. Like, he's pretty good right now in the meta. The only decks that he's not that great against are Django decks because they tend to run lower cost stuff. But even then, they've got 2 cost weapons, so he's pretty good. In Tier 1, I also have some version of Vader Raider. I have Vader Raider 2.0, which is the deck that was running binds and trying to get out upgrades. Vader Raider 1.0, which is more the don't play upgrades and just damage them, is also lingering in here. I think probably I would put both of them in the 1.5 tier, which is basically right between 1 and 2, again meaning super strong deck that could easily win an event. All right, let's drop down to Tier 2. Tier 2 is where it gets really interesting and really hard. I unfortunately don't have endless time. Like, if I could do Groundhog's Day and just play Tier 2 decks all day, I could have a larger list. There are probably 20 other decks that belong on this. So if you're not seeing your list here, I apologize. I just haven't gotten to them all yet. For instance, a couple decks that probably belong in here are like Akbar, Double Hired Gun. That seems like a pretty darn solid list that I don't have on here. Phasma list. I don't have a single Phasma list on here. Obviously, Phasma lists belong on this tier list. I think they belong in Tier 2 with how I've played against them. Maybe if I played with them, I would consider them higher. I think I've only played a Phasma list in the last couple of weeks, maybe 1 or 2 times, and it worked out really well. I won both of the games, but it just felt, not quite at the level of some of the other super top tier decks. So let's go through the list. I have Dooku Jabba on this list as Tier 2. This list kills me. I made a video a long time ago with the Dooku Jabba deck, and everyone was like, let's see your deck list, let's see your deck list. And I was like, yeah, I'll publish that. Don't worry, next week. And I never published it. And it wasn't because I was like, oh, I have this secret deck I will not show the world. Instead it was, I just can't settle on a list. I'm changing my list, not by a card, but like 5 cards every time I play it. and I still haven't settled on a list that I actually think is tier 1. I think there is one. I really do. I just can't find it. And the problem is that aggro is so overwhelming in this meta that when you mess around, you die. And I feel like this deck does a little too much messing around. Like, it's not really clear. Is it trying to mill you? Is it trying to damage you? Is it trying to do both? Is it trying to ace in the hole and to crime lord you? Which sounds great until you run into a Django Bala Trooper deck. And then it's like, okay, you killed one of their guys. Well, they still have a million guns shooting you down out of the sky. If you're playing against other decks and they see you trying to amass wealth, they immediately say, well, I need to start disrupting because he's obviously going to ace in the hole me. So Dooku Jabba or Vader Jabba, however you want to play it. I like Dooku Jabba better, I think. I think it has a place in the meta. I just can't work it out. So if someone has the tier 1 list, please do show it to me. I would love to see your list. Han Rey is a deck that just shoots up and down for me. There's a player in our meta, Austin, who is really, really good with this list. I originally had it as a tier 2 list. He plays it so well that I had bumped it up to tier 1. I played it myself for about a week, and it was right exactly what I thought it was. It has a really high ceiling. It can do amazing things, but Han's dice aren't that good. And if you end up taking a ton of damage and having to pitch all your weapons for second chances, yes, you do get to loop second chance for a while, but if you're not rolling well, it's really difficult. And so I had just had a couple games where RNG didn't go my way, and I just think decks like that are good. It's a real good deck. I mean, Austin has won lots of tournaments with it, but this is what tier 2 is, right? It's full of really good decks that I feel like are a little bit inconsistent. They have more of those moments where you go, oh, dice. Why does this have to be a dice game? Right? Normally I love the fact that it's a dice game, but every now and then it drives me crazy. And Han Rey is probably the deck that drives me craziest with that. Another deck is Django Jabba. Django Jabba is real interesting. There's a whole bunch of cool ways to build this. At first I thought this might be a tier 1 deck until everyone started just killing Django right away. And then I was like, okay. I mean, I had some awesome games where I had like 2 flamethrowers on Jabba and Wrecking Face. That's not the norm. And I just found this deck to be, again, really fun, really high ceiling, but also a low floor when the inconsistencies pop out too much. Vader Raider, I played it last week a lot. I went 12-1 with it. I think it's a tier 1.5 list. And this is not my deck. My deck, I think, is a tier 2 list, and this is the one linked here. But if you look for Will Klein's list, that's a tier 1.5 list. I can admit when my list is not as good. That was just a list I made in, was it November? And it's been innovated a lot since then. And there's not that many card differences, but there's enough to where I think you could put it in a better spot with about a 3 to 4 card change. And I can link that, actually. All right, Luke Akbar. Woo! Luke Akbar is a list. That thing is a wrecking ball when things go well. But boy, once Luke dies, you're dead. Like, Akbar is really bad. At least with Vader Raider, it's like Vader died. The Raider has maybe a Mind Probe or something on him. And then you have cool tricks like, you know, you roll it out and you get to resolve before they do anything. And then they can't respond with Django. They can't, you know, force throw you. They can't do all the things they want to do. Whereas Luke Akbar is just simply, oh, Luke died? I guess I can concede now. Like, the game's over. But it has a really high ceiling. It can do really well. You do have a lot of healing, lots of shields with dug in and things like that. I like the list a lot. I like playing it. But again, I feel like it has its moments where it just doesn't go well when Luke dies to a quick burst from a Django, and then you go, this is why it's tier 2. It'll win a tournament. It'll also lose some games that you're a little surprised by. There's a number of mono red decks that I think are pretty good. One of them is Akbar Troopers. I mean, this thing can do nutso amount of damage, just crazy amount of damage, with all-ins and it's a traps and tons of red dice. But again, decks like this, I feel like, tend to be a little inconsistent. You know, if your opponent is not running guns and suddenly it's a trap doesn't work, and then they're able to blitz down a trooper, maybe 2 troopers, and then it's just Akbar. When things go well for this deck, it's so good. When things don't, it's not as good. Qui-Gon Rey. people think Qui-Gon Rey is the best deck in the game. And I will say, it's good. I mean, tier 2 decks are real good. But I don't know. I'm not sold on it. I played it for a week. I just don't think there's enough there. I feel like it has a low amount of burst damage. It doesn't cheat damage very well. Luke's weapon is way worse than Kylo's saber. It doesn't have good enough mitigation. It's just not quite there. And the next set I think it'll be great, but I don't think it's there. Poe-Rey. Poe-Rey is another deck that I've been playing quite a bit of to try to get a better feel for, because the ceiling on this deck is ridiculous. It's like the highest ceiling in the game. You're like, all right, I'll roll Poe. I get 2 specials. I'll resolve the first one to throw a launch bay at your face for 5. I'll do the second one to throw Mind Probe at your face for 5 more. Your guy's dead. Like, you can do absurd things with Poe, and you can do crazy things like hit and run into Poe, holdout blaster into Poe. I love running the graveyard, so I can loop that holdout blaster. The stuff you can do with Poe-Rey is really insane. But once Poe dies, things are dicey. Like, did you get enough of the upgrades out on Rey? What happens when you don't run the specials? What happens when they just, control your dice? Then what? I just feel like Rey, all those Rey decks are usually tier 2 to me, because once that main guy dies and you're relying on Rey, it's kind of dicey. Her dice just aren't that good. Another interesting deck is Leia Akbar. I haven't played too much of this. It feels very similar to, the other mono red decks like Akbar Trooper. It has a really high ceiling. It can be a little inconsistent, and I do think it's a good meta answer to something like a Django deck, where with It's a Trap, it can really take advantage of those guns hanging around. Okay, so like I said, there are a ton more tier 2 decks. I imagine there's a couple more mono blue hero decks with Padawans that are going to make it. I'm sure you're going to message me like 40 others and say, Tinygrimes, why are you such an idiot? These also belong on your list, and you would probably be right. All right, I'm going to drop down to some tier 3 decks real quick. Tier 3 decks tend to be decks that, in my opinion, aren't quite there right now. They're probably not going to win a tournament. Maybe they will, because Pilot is so important in this game. But Grievous Dooku, just not enough health. Grievous is going to die, and then you're left with what? A 1-die Dooku. That's not that great. Hero decks with Mill and Patience, these used to be good. And then the meta got real fast and violent, and they die. What's super frustrating about both this deck and like the Padme Akbar decks is you always get so close to winning. It's so frustrating. It's hard to tell that the deck just isn't that good. You always feel like they got lucky. They got lucky. If this didn't happen, I win. I was literally one turn away from winning. I have heard that said to me 20 times, and I've said it myself another 20 times, and it just feels like these decks in this aggressive meta are just a little bit short. Like, they're so close, but they're not quite there. They're fun to play, but I would not take them into a tournament. I will say, anything tier 2 and above, I'd be fine taking to a tournament, and in fact, I have. I've gotten third with a Dooku Jabba deck. I've gotten second with a Han Rey deck. I've gotten third with a Vader Raider deck. I've gotten first with Kylo Dooku. I've gotten first with Django Double Trooper. So there's a lot of decks out there. I encourage you to explore as many as you can. I know a lot of people just want to sit on one list, but the more lists that you get comfortable with and you get good with, the better off you're going to be. So remember, if you want to have more interaction with me, you can always go to Patreon, Tinygrimes. The tier list is always being there and updated. Hope you enjoyed this. Limit yourself on the hate mail that you send via this tier list, and I'll see you next time on Tinygrimes Games.